Welcome everyone. I'm not sure, Trinsa, can everyone, do you know if everyone can hear me? Do we need to, that's wonderful. Thank you for the feedback. It's always perhaps one of the most challenging things, standing in one's office doing these things virtually is to know whether we're, connecting. So delighted that that you could join us today. I'll just pause for a couple of minutes because the scheduled start is 10:30, and I look forward to sharing some thoughts and then seeing if we can have a conversation at the end of that. For those of us here in Melbourne, and I guess across the southern parts of Australia, good to see some fine spring rain setting in. I'm not quite sure how you feel about it if you're a farmer and you've got crops growing, but it's never quite the right time, I suppose. Still, we work with what we've got. So hello to Alan Forbes, Catherine Anderson, Kenneth hello Kenneth, and Richard Brisbois, he's from Florida, and Stephen Holloway. So perhaps if everyone could just say where in the world you are in the chat box, and let's see just how widely we're spread this week. Melbourne, sunny Melbourne. Miami, of course, Richard, greetings. And of course it'll be, I suppose, about 8:30 last night for us there. Wonderful, delighted that you're all able to join us today. And there's the hour, or at least the half hour, which means it's time to kick along. We've got this recording, so please share your thoughts as you go along, and pop in questions. I'll go through my presentation and then seek to get into a bit of a conversation. Look forward to it. Okay, so this century thinking. What was I thinking? Well, I was really thinking that having 4 grandchildren on this planet, and with a lot of the dire forecasts going around, what on earth can I do with my time between now and 65, and perhaps between now and when I'm 90, to actually bring together what I have thought. My screen seems zoomed in. Well, there we are. I've gone out to full screen. I'm not quite sure, Trinsa, if you can address it from where you are. And so, before the technology derailed me, I was just talking about my grandchildren and really thinking about, well, what is it that we at our generation, can do to help the young ones face the world that, essentially we have created for them. And, having worked and lived within large organizations, one of the things that's quite clear is that, through my working life, quite a lot of work's been done in systems thinking and systems engineering and creating these disciplines that integrate, that don't separate, they integrate. But unfortunately, they haven't gotten, a lot of public awareness about them. So that's really one of the things then that I'm seeking to do through these webinars, is actually lift the level of awareness on those things that we've learned over the last 60 years about integration, not breaking things down, and about intervention, not problem solving, because everything is systemic. And in the first webinar, we talked about those things systemic. In the second webinar, we really looked into the value of doing that and what it meant for leadership to actually engage in systemic issues. Now we're going inside, deep inside. And in terms of, you know, giving some value to governing values, or how we value the governing of values, because that indeed is what we do. And that then goes to the topic today. And I must say, thank you to everyone for your patience over the last week, as we had to postpone by a week because sadly, you know, I lost the sole source of our governing values. Our family lost our father, grandfather, and great-grandfather a couple of weeks ago, and we said farewell to him earlier this week. But really, this is where governing values starts, isn't it? It certainly started for me, you know, as I think about my relationship with this man and with my parents, about what they taught us and imbued in us through our behavior to be truthful and to seek the truth and to seek the truth in others. And as you do that, but do it with respect. And those were really the bits from this man and my mother that really, you know, sunk deep within. And the same is true for all of us, right? That our parents are our starting point for governing values and our sole source. And one thing I learned from Dad, because Dad was a ship's engineer and he spent many years on board this vessel, the SS Edinburgh Castle, circumnavigating Africa. But basically, that's a small town with all the functionalities of a small town at sea on its own. If something breaks, it's got to be fixed on that ship. You cannot, you know, it's not so easy then in the 50s to fly something in or what have you. You have to think about it as an organic whole, from water systems, sewerage systems, power, communications, transmission, hospitality, accommodation, the whole box and dice, or it's all wrapped in there. So it's a small community in and of itself. And then and Dad's love of sailing, and one of the other things that he imbued in us really is to own your own mistakes, you know, and in one of the stories he quite fondly told, because he was living his truth of owning his mistakes. For a while, Dad was a coxswain at the Royal Yacht Squadron in Cowes on the Isle of Wight. And the Commodore at the time was actually Prince Philip. So it fell to Dad to take Prince Philip in the squadron's launch back to the Royal Yacht. And he did that, took him out, boom, pulled alongside, reversed the launch up, tied it off on the gangway. Prince Philip was piped aboard. And when Prince Philip was safely aboard, Dad heard the bosun up there on the deck say to the young lads, who, because it was a training vessel, say to the young lads, "There you go, lads. Now, when you learn well and practice your seamanship, you'll be able to handle a motor launch just as that man down there did." And Dad said, "Wow," you know, he said his head went, he says, I'll show these lads. No more to do. Rams the throttles forward, heels off to starboard, and there's a God almighty crash behind him as he's pulled the bloody gangway off the Royal Yacht. Now, of course, bit of embarrassment. But his point was, you know, and he could not but own up to that. But it was about how then he used that as an example of, you know, allowing hubris to get in, and basic things falling away when that gets in the way. And so a very salutary lesson of the value of governing values, you know, and really, and he was a great master at this, of course, of teaching your children well. Now, do we do the same? What is it that we carry forward into the mess that is today's world, right? There is, cheers. There's all sorts of issues kicking around. And the reality is that they're all connected in some way, shape, or form. They're connected with human life on Earth. And if we want to leave our children a better world, then we've got to be able to sort through this. So, to governing values. And what sits at the core? Well, there's me. There's my lovely partner, Vicky, my lovely family, and our eldest daughter, Trinza, is on the call here today. And then how we engage in the community and through our business and operate at times, or sometimes have done in my life at the national level, and then for sometimes in my life at the global level. Well, super. But what we find, though, for a lot of us, is that we've lost a lot of trust in what's happening at the business, national, and global levels, because this whole thing of individuals, you know, just getting in the way and losing touch with common values. You know, so bad behavior was the GFC really a global ethics crisis? It seems to me that perhaps there's a good measure of truth in that assertion. And what if instead, though, you know, we could actually think about what are the good values that each of us carries, and how indeed can we live congruent to those values right through our working and our living lives, and how we interact at each of these levels, because interact we do. So when I look around, and this is just a very short sample from the internet, you know, taken just on an as occasion basis for, well, what values are people posting? And too often we do see them just posted. How people might act, default to action, focus on process. And there's nothing wrong with any of these statements. Nothing wrong with them at all. And here's another set. Focus on consumers first. Be passionate. Have fun. Yay. You know, work with integrity and with, you know, strive for excellence, courage, and do so, you know, acting boldly into the world, but do it with joy, you know. Wonderful, wonderful. But in many ways, how we look across that, it's a bit of a soup. And so the question for me, though, is how, as each of us now work as individuals, with family, with community, business, and more widely, how can we look for those things that are common in humans and scalable through that? Because those are the things that maybe will drive systemic change. And therein is my hope, that we find these things. And here's some thoughts from me. This isn't one of my thoughts. I had forgotten that this was this particular slide was in the way, but it certainly makes the point that it's what we do that represents our values. It's not so much, any gap between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do. People watch what we do, and we know that, right? So it's what we do and use that represents our values. So it really does pay to start off by, you know, a look in the mirror. And just like any legal framework, and this isn't a legal framework, but by God, if we don't have the truth, what have we, right? And so let's start with valuing honesty. And then perhaps just like in a court of law, where they say, yes, do you tell the truth? Well, yeah, I think all of us do at times. But do we tell the whole truth? And at times, and I can look at that even, you know, say, to be honest, in my relationship with my lovely wife, Vicky, and, you know, will I say things that is the whole truth that hurt her? And sadly, at times I do, but it's always something that we weigh up in ourselves about the full degree of transparency. And there's such a call for transparency in our business and social systems today that it really is a core skill for us to learn how to be fully transparent without causing the injury and harm of being bluntly transparent. So, and that goes to how we communicate and how much we practice the communication of transparency. And then mindfulness. Now, I did meditate and for 10 minutes before coming on today, just to help clear the mind, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I mean is that we need to be mindful of the whole. What is it that we're seeking to do? You know, ultimately for our businesses, our organizations, what is the value they're adding, the positive construct for the world? And then are we mindful of how that whole operates? Because it's only through being mindful that we can even begin to collaborate. We can begin to understand that no one person knows it all or can do it all. There'll probably be a few in each organization that might claim that. But what's the basis for collaboration? And it's really mindful of the overall outcome that the organization is seeking to achieve, how that's been structured and functionally separated, even though it shouldn't be functionally separated, often it is. But so that we build a basis for collaboration and really valuing the working together. Then accountability. One of the other things that we really strive, but it's often the first thing. So look at the unfolding now of events in Victoria, trying to find, well, who's accountable? Who's accountable? But ultimately, you know, one has, and I'm very wary of this, as to whether what some selfish interests might be is to find out who is accountable so that they know who is to blame, and then that saves them being fully transparent on their part in the puzzle. And therein is part of the problem, because there is a distinct connection with the mismanagement of quarantine in Victoria as a case in point, and the way in which aged care is designed and the death numbers that have resulted through COVID. So we really cannot separate fully, as we look at COVID, you know, accountability for quarantine with accountability for aged care, if what we're about is a better result from dealing with communicable disease in the future. We've got to think more systemically and think about accountability in those terms. And so it's less about who's to finger and who's to blame, but let's look at accountability in the context of collaboration. did you do what you said you would do? And I think that's a better frame for accountability. Because we've got to be mindful of the whole. We can't do it all, but we know what we're all about. We know how we're sharing the work to get things done. And I'm agreeing to do this piece of it, noting its connection to these other pieces. And I'm going to do this, and that's what I'm accountable for. So let's think, about how we reframe and value accountability more in that sort of framework. And then, of course, because it's systemic, and because we really value honesty and transparency, and things are going to go wrong. Things will go wrong, right? It hits the fan every day in some way. Full transparency means that bad news needs to flow up. And I've been in organizations where it flows up to a certain point, and then what was a red flag comes a green flag when it gets up to the senior executives. And you go, come on. So let's value and respect people bringing the truth to the surface, because they are acting with the best interests of the overall organization and overall outcomes that our organization is seeking to drive. And of course, they're all connected. And this is really that you can't get to accountability, really, if you want true accountability of being able to do what you say you're going to do, if you're not honest, transparent, mindful of the whole, working with others artfully to bring it together. Do what you say you will do, and respect those or others because you do not know what they're bearing today. I'm not the only one that loses a parent. We all sometimes will lose a parent, and how that impacts our day, and etc. And that's just one example of how the governing values need to be reinforcing each other, and then they can work together as a whole, because that is symbiotic with people working together as a whole. And what that seeks to do then, because everything is connected, remember, the lesson from my dad, everything is connected, and that if we are to get a deeper systemic understanding, then we need to have conversations based on governing values that themselves are connected, lest self-interest prevail. But coming back to the mirror, we could look in the mirror and connect these in and of ourselves. So as we hold ourselves to account, we could easily ask of ourselves how well in our last iterations that we've been living these values. Because people watch our behavior, remember? That's the thing. Yeah, we know that. So six little checkpoints, knowing that each is nested in the other and then reinforces the other. But how then does that flow into, the broader organizational picture, and then even globally? I don't know that I have fully the answer to that. But I know that there's some barriers that get in the way. Yeah, like lying. Now there's a study being conducted that shows, as us as social beings, that if anyone notices a leader telling even just a little bit of a lie, then that gives them permission also to tell a little bit of a lie. And then what happens? Well, it's just like the spread of a virus. From that little bit, a little bit more grows. Oh, it's only a little bit more than untruth than we told before, you know, and we sort of hope then that no one actually catches us out. And you know, what about the rise over the last decade of fact-checking and the like? Simply because, you know, people are being caught out. But it's, and this is something that needs raising. And the whole way in which we think about fact-checking on one level, but ideally not needing to have fact-checking if, as leaders, we are being deeply honest and true in what we say. And I'm not suggesting that everyone, you know, there's the that it's inherent in us, but it's when self-interest and greed gets in the way that even just a little bit of a lie begins an exponential growth in the truth not being told. Then, of course, what is that? That propagates vulnerability and shame. Oh, shit. You know I said I'd do something under the accountability thing, and well, I got 8 out of 10, but there's 2 that I said I'd really get done, and you want to fob it a bit, you know, a little bit shameful instead of, and again, here's the little bit of connection from accountability to honesty and transparency, is the extent to which we're actually prepared to say, hey, I screwed up. I own my mistake. And of course, there's many social factors around there. And of course, the queen and an absolute guru in this space is Professor Brené Brown. And I love her work on how indeed, as social beings, we can learn to be more vulnerable in the search of, you know, driving a better world, and just accepting that as humans, yes, we're imperfect, but let's all live with that and work with that. Now, in terms of the mindfulness, remember it was about mindfulness of the outcome, mindfulness of the whole, and how indeed then our business models enable us to be mindful of the whole. And frankly, I stagger to think how often business models don't represent the complexity of corporate life today. You know, if someone pulls out a business model and it's A4 broken into squares, then that's a very linear perspective trying to represent the chaos that is the corporate world. And that we need something that is far more connected, that people can interpret and understand and know where they fit, and indeed, so that indeed they are then able to achieve better collaboration, and indeed able to deliver, you know, greater transparency, because they understand what's important to other people. They know how the business works. And often they're not. And I would say I remember when I was in the defense world, reporting back to a senior executive committee on a particular project. And we had a director of one of the big banks present at the table. And after we'd finished, you know, and there was a group of us doing the presentation, he said, that's wonderful, because what we were about, we're actually putting in a new business model for seaworthiness. But his point was, boom, he said, I had conversation in the bank this morning, and it's the same conversation that we had 10 years ago. And we're having that conversation still for want of a better business model. So really getting to understand how things come together, and it's a barrier to success with mindfulness. Collaboration. Well, its arch enemy is competition, right? Everyone wants the best bit of the cake, and then, you know, to eat it themselves, and, you know, and that's an unfair characterization. But competition and the way in which that is engendered, because there's very much a mantra at one level that competitive forces really do the best for consumers. Well, self-interest also exists for all consumers and all participants as well, and that's what gets in the way of really good collaboration. And that goes back to the transparency and vulnerability, mindfulness of the whole. Can you actually have the conversations and speak openly about what the broad business outcomes are to actually transform competitive forces into collaborative forces? So it's you know, less of the power over and more of the power with people is what is part and parcel of the transformation to getting good collaboration. And then the barrier to accountability, well, goodness me, measurement systems, you know, one of the old mantras that I actually quite abhor, I'll admit, is the one that says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Well, yes, now measures are important, but let's think of them much more systemically, right? And it was the things that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And no, that wasn't Einstein, and that was William Cameron, who wrote that in 1963. And it's very true indeed. So really how we design and construct our measurement systems really goes to the heart of whether or not we can get great accountability that enable people to say things and do things and commit to doing it, and holding themselves accountable and giving praise to others in the way in which engenders further collaboration. You know, it goes to Collins's level 5 leaders. When your measurement systems enable that, of accountable people holding themselves to account in the mirror and putting praise out the window, then we've got a really good measurement system operating. And then respect. Well, then I think this goes to the system of leadership, and that's something that I'll talk about at another time, but it's really practiced from the top. And the first time that a CEO goes out and says, you know what, I don't know, right? And asks questions that encourages people to be seen to be doing what they're, you know, what they're accountable for, but it fits within the whole. And knowing through that sort of questioning from CEOs and the senior executives that they respect the contribution of people. And we've seen it in COVID, thank goodness, eh? And that here we've got now, you know, frontline nurses, cleaners, all of those things that it takes to, and shopkeepers and the like, that keeps our society running, gaining the respect that previously was really hard won, in fact, often not given. So there's a whole range of barriers, but the thing is, from here is, you know, back to how everything is connected, that if we're going to live a set of values that themselves we can use to look in the mirror, then there's a whole lot of systemic change around the living of those values that need to tie in with those values. They're connected, and it's absolutely crucial that they remain so. Because if they do, then I could stand back, you know, I also like the view from the moon, that everything is connected, that we all live and impact that little pale blue dot in the distance. but am I living congruent and authentic to the values I hold as I carry them through my relationship with my wife, with my family, into the community that I love, into the business, national and globally, so that indeed we can start to build some concept of what, planetary leadership really is all about. And I think that the basis for that comes to the core of who we are as individuals, and how indeed that core can then be propagated through the values that govern our actions in the world. And that we need to be able to, connect eyeball to eyeball. Our daughter Trinza and her family spent 4 short years in the Middle East. And while there, I went along to the Sheikh Mohammed Center for Cultural Understanding. And in my typical Western way, walked in and went to greet people, this fellow with a handshake, and he grabbed my wrist, which forced my wrist to grab his. But then he pulled me in, and it was eyeball, nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball. And he was looking deep into my soul to see whether or not he could trust me. But that was the nature of their culture in the whole Bedouin tribes, the warring lords and the like, to really look one in the eye. And we can do it ourselves by looking ourselves in the mirror, but also how we look each other in the eye and see whether or not we are holding ourselves to the values that govern us, hold ourselves to those, and see how that is propagating in others, because it's the essence of trust. And it goes to how we code every strand of our DNA, every strand of the organization that we lead. And in the last one, this really drove, from a conversation with Larry Kennedy, who was in the Apollo program. And this is my take on something he said of don't rush past the facts to get to an outcome. I say don't rush past value to get to an outcome. And today what I've given you is, my conception of the values that come and live within me. But I can see, potentially having value, but how do we in our organizations conceive values in ways that then can be propagated in how we contribute value? And that is for the next webinar, as we'll move around to the blue circle on here, and then in the webinar after that, how we tie into the value counted and really start to think about the measurement systems that sit behind how what we measure drives better outcomes. So that's as much as I want to say on this particular call. What I stand for certainly is sustainable development. I'd love this planet to keep going as long and longer, it will go longer than human life, but for human life to live as long as possible on this planet, because the people I love are a part and parcel of that. And I'm dead keen to look at ways in which we can unify and actually, in that integration sense, I'm still about diversity, but how do we bring diverse political, social, and technological points of view together? And I think the way is to look a lot more at nature. They've been doing an ecological approach for billions of years. And there's a lot to be learnt from there in the way in which we think about not just technology in the social context, that's socio-technological, but what is the social activity in ecological context, so that we get the socio-ecological points of view in the way in which we can have a much more sustainable impact on this planet. Part and parcel of this, I have recorded this session, and aspects will end up in a book that'll be published next year, early next year, I trust, that is called This Century, you know, and how to lead without there we are, a senior moment right at the time when I shouldn't have a senior moment. How to lead? Yes. Well, there'll be a good tie line in there. What a bloody silly thing to forget right now. Please, you know, if we're not already connected, let us do so. And I look forward now to opening the chat and inviting people to right, I see. So let me come down and see if I exit full screen, and can I go down and allow people to talk.
Yeah, you've done
that earlier. Allow to talk. Allow to talk. Kenneth. Allow to talk. Stephen. So there we are. We are all able. So if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question, then please do so. Stunned silence, which is wonderful. And I can zoom back out to full
Richard,
screen.
This is Richard.
Hello, Richard. I can't hear
Greetings
Richard.
from the other side. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, Richard, I can't hear you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Richard. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Trinza.
Okay, excellent.
Maybe we should speak amongst ourselves.
Oh, is it a question you could type in, Richard?
Or if you ask it, Richard, I'll type it.
So I was wondering, Richard presented a series.
My apologies. It's at the problem was at my end.
Can you hear me now, Richard?
I can now, sir. Thank you indeed.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I wondered, I wonder if you could say a few words. I very much enjoyed the way you presented the values one after another. And I wonder if you can say a few words on how they came about for you and how they came to form a whole for you.
Then certainly what truth, honesty. My wife and I, when we had children, and we had a big conversation before Trinza, who's on the call here, was born. just said, so what is, you know, the thing that we want? And ultimately, it was about having children. Well, in fact, it goes beyond, before then. I'd met Vicky in 1973, November, and just under a year later, she was 16 then, I was 18, and a year later, we were sitting on the lawn at in Victoria Square in Adelaide, for those that that might know that, and just talking as we waited for the bus. And she said to me, you know, because things were starting to get towards, you know, what if we married? What if, you know, having children or whatever, are those sorts of things? Because I'd fallen head over heels backwards in love. And this 17-year-old girl stopped me and said, you know, Richard, if you want to marry me, then you need to know that I want a loving relationship that lasts for life. I want us to have children who live in that loving relationship so they too can have loving relationships. And she said then, and if you don't want that, don't ask me to marry you. Oh, wow. 17. God, how many 17-year-olds would talk like that? So there's the first aspect of systems thinking. So roll forward only about 3 years, and Trinza was on the way. And we then started saying, so what do we want for our children? Well, you know, back to this conversation of before getting married. But if there's one thing that we're going to insist on, yes, we want them to just be happy in the world, and being able to find happiness in the world. So then what's the one thing? And it was around honesty. If nothing else, we can't deal with things if we do not know how they're feeling, and that they can tell us truthfully what is going on and how they're feeling about it. Then, you know, it's bloody hard. And I always maintain, so that's where the honesty piece came from, right from, you know, when Trinza was born way back in the, ages ago, 70s. And so that became very much a catch-all for bringing everything back to honesty, because without truth, nothing. Roll forward 40 years, and I find myself then working in the Defence Seaworthiness Program. And one of the things that we'd looked at was, well, what are all the issues that we're dealing with? Boom. And one of them, and then we scaled them, you know, if we fix them, what's the impact? And then what's the degree of difficulty in actually fixing them, right? So what was, what was right up here, biggest impact if we fixed it, and hardest to fix? Leadership behavior. So we thought, bloody hell, how on earth can we do that? And we settled on 4 values that would govern that program. And they were, lo and behold, transparency, mindfulness, collaboration, and accountability. But it always seemed to be missing something for me, and they worked okay. But there was no guarantee of the truth, and there was no guarantee of respect when you actually raised things. So it's only since I left that program that I brought those other 2 in, and it helped for me complete the cycle around that, because that Seaworthiness program went ultimately to how within a large complex organization that reaches out to industry, has a huge industry base in Australia and around the world for that matter. How do we then govern that to ensure the worthiness of what they're delivering for the Navy? And the only way we could do that, it was have an outcome focused, goal-based regulatory framework. And that's what we designed and put in place around those 4 governing values, which was in the, as I said, mindfulness, transparency, mindfulness, collaboration, and accountability. But since then, as I've done work with others, then that honesty piece, you can't have transparency without you guaranteeing the truth in the first place. And bad news is still pretty hard to take up through a military organization, and respect. And there is a lot of respect. I don't decry that, but I think it behoves making it explicit in the governing value set. And then the penny dropped for me that it seemed to complete the cycle, because that respect then reinforced the ability of the leader to say, there's every encouragement for you to tell me the truth. I need to trust in your truth. And so then it went around, and then it becomes a reinforcing cycle. So that was ultimately where a long tail for it to come together, Richard.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that.
Richard, this is Steve. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Oh, Stephen. Hi, Steve.
Yeah.
Great to have you on the call.
No, well, thank you for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. And certainly, very much gets you thinking. I suppose just as a bit of a segue on what you've just said in terms of trust and leadership and the like, and how feedback from the bottom sometimes doesn't get to how it should be presented at the top. Shouldn't it then behove a leader to actually then be curious and actually dive down to make sure that what they're being told is correct, and actually sort of probably check? I mean, I think what's happening here in Victoria is probably a classic case of a lack of curiosity on behalf of leaders.
That could be, yes. There is, so it's an element. I will agree, Steve. It's an element in the puzzle, a lack of curiosity and doing things the way we've always been done. So one of the things around the measurement system, for example, let's dive in there, is that in today's economy we love efficiency, right? We put efficiency at the top of the pile, because then it enables basically a better bottom line. Taking costs out of the business. Yes, okay. I've had a global CEO phone me up and tell me exactly that, and so this whole drive for taking costs out, we lose the notion of redundancy that's valuable, and so the lack of curiosity is not so much about, well, what's happening all the way down at the detail, but what's the consequence of living and doing things the way we've always done it. And I think for leaders, that's the bigger thing, but it takes more time to do it, as well you'd appreciate, Steve, from your own and I know Steve should declare for others for 2 decades now, and he's got a very rich history of being able to take leaders on that strategic thinking journey and help them experiment with the future to build, and create better decisions today. And that's the sort of stuff that really would have made a bigger difference. As we talk about curiosity at the detail, well, if I go back to my seaworthiness project, I remember being out in Perth, and that's a good, 3,000 kilometers away from Canberra in the decision center, with a captain whose job it was to do a particular part of this review. And lo and behold, while we're talking to the captain who was running this segment out in Perth, the captain takes a call, and it's from the Chief of Navy. and the Chief of Navy is asking questions that relate to exactly why we were in the office. So the captain I was with just notions and says, please, I'd like to have a word with the chief. So she, very brave, took the phone from her fellow captain and said, "G'day, sir, I think we've got this in hand, but tell me, if you're doing my job, who's doing yours?" And then hung up. Now, needless to say, she wasn't promoted or kept in the service, but whatever else. But therein is part of the issue, that the extent to which leaders dig right down can be, you know, an appropriate thing to do, but equally can cause enormous damage to those, because it says that I'm not trusting you to actually get this job done. So it really needs to be carefully balanced as to the context that drives the action. I welcome any feedback or comment.
No, sorry, Richard. Just on that, I think you're right in terms of that balance between micromanagement and the like. I suppose it is a question, though. It's always good just to do your own independent check from time to time in an appropriate way.
Totally.
And once you believe the system's, you know, operating as it should, then let people get on with it.
Yeah, totally. But there's nothing better, though. You know, what should CEOs be doing? Getting out from behind the bloody chair and walking their organization, and then stopping and asking, so what do you do here? How does that fit within the whole? You know, do you understand where your piece fits? And then asking pertinent questions, not to try and catch the person out, but actually to let them see that the CEO appreciates the value that they're adding, but equally, you know, keeping eyes open as to what's not adding up across the organization. And that's the sense-making capability that CEOs and senior executives really need, you know, and that, you know, the good ones do build that through a lifetime of experience. Well,
exactly. And I think as you sort of say, it's not a question of trying to catch people out.
No, because if that's the way it comes across, then everyone will just run and hide or play a very straight bat, and then what are they doing? You know, not going to be fully transparent. I can't trust you not to give me a spanking, as it were, if I tell you the real truth of what's going on around here. So it comes for a, and I don't think the parenting metaphor works particularly well for leaderships, but then one should ask that, you know, well, if this was the family that you wanted to keep going in a loving relationship for life, then how would you deal with it?
Richard and Steve, I wonder, this is Richard.
Hello, Richard.
I wonder if the high up, and I think we could all share, all share savory anecdotes about this. If the high up has to go all the way down, one wonders who else in between is not manning the store.
Yeah.
As a reflex, if at the C level, I feel the need for myself to do that, then there's a whole lot of stuff that hasn't happened in between. Mm-hmm. That sounds like it should be a trigger.
Indeed. Indeed. But I think it behoves good leaders to bring up better leaders too, you know, that the whole, and I know it was from Peter and Waterman's In Search of Excellence, where management by walking around was, you know, first made or popularized, at least in the academic world, but then it sort of fell out of vogue. But yet it's been a lifelong practice. My friend, Dr. Joseph Bradley, who was on our call last time, I interviewed him since then because as a chief engineer on a ballistic missile submarine for the US Navy, I was particularly keen on how he kept, what was it that he was doing to help instill that sort of, mind the store attitudes and leadership right through the right through the cohort. And he said, well, look, when he was in dock, he would take the junior lieutenants on a walk with him and then go through and say, so what did you see? And you go, well, and the first time round, well, what do you mean, what did I see? And then, well, what I noticed was these 4 things going on in the yard that actually, are either safety related, whatever else, but, so what is it then about the way in which we're leading this that's creating those sorts of risks to be taken? And to actually get people thinking about the work that they did at the desk and how it was being lived in the real world, and do that from very early on. And so he did that as he went up the ranks to ultimately being chief engineer, of how he brought his leaders up with him to have and build that integrating and almost like that third eye that we often talk about, of how you can be able to look down while you're walking through. Yeah. Okay. Well, we are close to time. I see a couple have dropped off, but thank you so much for joining us here today. I enjoy the topic, and I think that it really does go to the heart of this century's thinking about systemic change. Good. Hope you can join us next time.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Steve.